Hello, and welcome to Unco. I'm your host, Timothy Buck. My guest this week was Cassidy Williams, the head of developer voice programs working on Alexa for Amazon. We talked about designing voice-first user experiences, both without a screen and with a screen, building feedback loops into voice-first tools, the future of voice-first computing, and a whole lot more. If you'd like to hear more episodes like this one, help me keep the show around by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/uncofm. Hi, Cassidy. How's it going?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I am so glad to have you on the show. I think it's going to be a really interesting episode. Can you start off by giving my listeners a little bit of a history of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So currently I am at Amazon and I lead up developer voice programs at Amazon. And before that, I was coding at a bunch of different companies, usually small ones, mostly startups. And Amazon is my first really big company I've worked for. And yeah, I have a very software engineering background. Did lots of back-end development and front-end development. And coming to Amazon, this is my first not developer or developer evangelist role. It's kind of a combination of both, plus a few other fun things at Amazon. And what developer voice programs are at Amazon is with Alexa, we get a lot of new things released pretty regularly. And developers are very opinionated. And so I hear the developer voice, hence the name, and I take their feature requests, their feedback, all sorts of things that developers want, and I bring those to the product teams and say, okay, this developer wanted this is how you should build it, go. Or I'm not sure how you would build it, but this is what they want. And so it's kind of an in-between person. And then on the other side of my job, I take things that the product teams have made and I might build something with it. If it's a new feature that they don't want to release to the public yet, I'll build something with it and then show them what it was like, give them my feedback, tell them how they can improve it, and then once that's all set, I'll communicate that to developers so that way they can participate in beta programs or just get their hands on new features. And so it's a fun role that's both technical and lots of communication and stuff.
That's really cool. That was actually going to be my first question, because I read that description on your Twitter bio and I wasn't fully sure what that meant. That's helpful, and that seems really interesting. Moving on from that, one of the other interesting thing about your job and what you're working on is this concept of voice first user experience. And it seems like you've been focusing a lot on helping developers to develop good user experiences and working on it with the product team to make sure that the developers have a good user experience. But do you have any thoughts on how this concept of a voice-first user experience is changing design?
Yeah, and so voice first was something that when it really kind of hit me, I was like, wow, this is incredibly different. And I'm not entirely sure if I'm prepared for this, but it's a different way of thinking, because everybody who is building software today has a visual component. Whether it's in VR or AR or web development or mobile app development, there's some element of either looking at something or touching something. And so voice first is a completely different mindset in that you have to kind of study the art of just conversation. And when I'm designing for voice-first experiences and talking through how to make voice-first experiences, the first thing I do is I pull up a script writing software and I just write a script saying, okay, if I say, Alexa, open this, what should happen? She'll say, hi, welcome to our app. Here's what we're going to do. And I have to draft out what the conversation sounds like. Ooh. I have one in the room with me and she heard me. Sorry about that. But anyway, when I'm putting together those kinds of design experiences, it's more about the art of the conversation rather than the art of like what it will actually look like, the actual visual art. And it's definitely something that a lot of people don't think about, and a lot of developers kind of struggle with at first because they kind of just want to get into the code. And that's how I am too. I just want to say, okay, how do I get to hello world? Awesome, I'll take it from here, and just writing code. But if you don't have that voice design set up initially, then there's all kinds of edge cases with voice, and kind of figuring out, saying, okay, if I don't understand this, what should I do to make up for that? How do I make the conversation seem natural enough that someone isn't just like, come on, listen to what I have to say? And yeah, it's a really, really interesting realm right now to be a part of.
Yeah, I think as like web and app design has gotten more mature, or app development has gotten more mature, the concept of like, oh yeah, it needs to have a good design has become more common. Like most developers understand that even if they're not designers themselves, that they realize that there is value in having like a user experience or a UI designer to make something more user friendly and useful to the end user. But it because voice first is so new, I'm interested in, is there such thing as like a user experience designing team for voice first? Is there even like the concept of an experienced designer for voice first?
There is such a thing. They're just very rare.
Yeah.
The ones who I've met, they are definitely one in a million, and they really understand kind of that art of conversation and how to make it flow. And I tend to think I can talk pretty well. I can draft up a conversation and code it, but those voice designers really really know what they're doing, and it's something where if you don't have a lot of experience in it, you don't know what you're missing. And
Yeah.
I made a skill recently for Alexa, who's listening to me, and I remember I was like kind of happy with it. I was just like, okay, yeah, this gets the job done. And then just changing a few sentences with the designer made the conversation flow so much better that I didn't even understand like how I could have missed it. And so sometimes it's just good to have the designers with the sanity check. And I've noticed that the best voice designers are ones that have like some kind of playwriting experience. I know a lot of just like product people and voice design people who like studied theater or studied some element of playwriting in addition to whatever design background they have, and they are very good at the voice design because it's designing a conversation.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Like I was trying to like compare it to the good visual designers that I know, and they tend to have like a visual art background of some sort, or like other sort of skills there. But you're right. Like if it's kind of a completely different skill set. Other than like playwriting, is a lot of I don't know, like language study and speech pathology and stuff like that. Is that a part of the user, like voice user experience? Is that something that either at Amazon or you've heard of at all?
Um, I personally haven't seen it much at Amazon, and that's just because I probably haven't interacted with the team much. But I know for a fact that some companies do use that, and especially, for example, when people are making skills for kids or skills to help people with certain speech patterns and stuff, they bring in professionals. And I've worked at some events and talked with some developers who work for very large companies, and they build skills that will teach kids how to spell, but need the conversation to be friendly, so it's not just like the device is another parent, and
Right.
like the that kind of interaction and figuring out how to understand the target audience and how to speak to the target audience. It takes a lot of interesting interesting perspectives, and whether it's from like actually bringing in some kind of psychologist, or or pathologist or something, or just knowing someone who has background and asking their advice, I do think that there's a place for them. And maybe as voice first computing gets bigger and better and grows a lot, maybe as that happens, more teams will include all of these different people for designing good conversational experiences. But yeah, I personally haven't met many teams who do that just yet.
Yeah, I think we're in the early days. I think comparing it to visual designers is probably a good comparison, because small companies or in the early stages, and even today, smaller companies start off with maybe their developers do the design, their front end developers do that, and then they eventually bring in some designers, and then as they grow and the software experience becomes more and more important, they tend to bring in more and more specialized people to, who are writing the text for the UI, or who are working solely on the animation portion, or different things like that. And I think we'll see more and more of that in voice first as well, as this matures and becomes it continues to grow.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Totally. And one interesting thing that we've been kind of experimenting with is because, again, there's all these new devices that Alexa comes with. I need to come up with another name for her so that way I don't keep waking her up.
So,
but
I know in a lot of that you may not want to do this, but in a lot of podcasts I listen to, when they talk about this or any of the competitors, they just call it dingus.
Dingus.
Dingus. So
I might get in trouble for calling her that. So maybe I'll just call her. Actually, wait. She has a mute button. 1 second. I'm just gonna mute her really quick.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. That
Yeah.
is probably a much smarter way to go about it than to call her by something that she shouldn't be called. But
I think that was originally back before they understood the difference between voices.
Oh.
And so anytime anybody on a podcast mentioned the name, everybody listening to it without headphones, their devices would go off.
I could see
and
that.
So it became a big deal. That was back, if you had a big enough show, people would be really frustrated because the whole show long, their device was going off in the background. But now that pretty much all of them can distinguish between who's saying it, it's not as big of a problem.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, where was I? Oh, I was talking about multimodal experiences. So one interesting thing that I've been noticing is how to maintain voice-first design with a device that has a screen. And for example, we have the Echo Show and the Echo Spot, and I'm sure many other devices that I don't even know about will be coming out soon with screens on them. And people are comfortable with the GUI, the graphical user interface, and being able to touch and interact. But how do you maintain a voice-first experience with a voice-first device that just happens to have a screen? And I was talking with a designer recently, a voice designer, and she was saying, so the two experiences, they have to just kind of coexist in their own special way. The voice and visual experiences have to enhance one another and optimize each other. And you still want the voice to guide the customer. You want the voice interactions to be natural and simple, but it's supposed to be about the voice and not about the touch experience and the visual experience. And they want to ensure that every touchable thing on a screen can also be selected with a voice. And so if you're given a list of things on the screen, you can touch one of them, or you could say, pick the third one, and it should be able to do that. And you should never require someone to use a screen. And so I think by enforcing those kinds of rules, by maintaining voice first, that will definitely mature the ability of people to kind of get into that mindset that this is a conversation and we have to design those conversations and experiences to be accessible to anyone who can speak.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I think you're right. As we have more and more devices that have are voice first, but also include like some sort of display. And that seems like it's a trend that's just going to continue for a long time. That may actually help the designers of the voice first experience, because it kind of like they can port over some of their previous knowledge from having to design the like visual UI of it as well. I don't know. I think I need to think more about that, but that's interesting.
Yeah, it's all really about like maintaining the rules and focusing on like the main purpose of the device and kind of going from there. And I think again, it's very easy to stray and be just like, oh well, there's a screen, so I'm just going to do this and this, and then they can just like say yes or no if they have to. But that's not what it's about. And I think being able to maintain those rules and focus, so that way you can build these experiences, is definitely key there.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Like, if it has a screen, do you require people to look at the screen for that experience to like have the full experience, or is it the type of thing where if you see it, it's a benefit, but like you could be looking a different direction and it would still be just as valuable. I think taking that approach seems like the right approach. But
yeah, I agree, and I think that is definitely the right approach. It's again, voice first. You should be able to not be able to see at all and still be able to interact.
Yeah. So continuing with this train of thought, another like thing that we see a lot of in design and user experience design and UI design is these feedback loops. And we have all of these different tools for collecting feedback from customers and for tracking their usage and for seeing like, what is successful, and we A/B and test things. And there's all of that to see like if our designs and our user experiences are actually like benefiting the user and how we can improve those. Is there a concept of that built out yet for voice first design?
Yeah, and so it's in terms of what's happening over at Alexa, we do have a really nice developer console that was actually just released in the past couple months, and I've been speaking a lot with their skill testing team, and they think about this all the time. And it's all about like, okay, how do we get the interactions to see how often it fails and why does it fail, so that way we can like fix the conversation so it's easier to understand while still maintaining the privacy of the people who are using the skill. And it's fascinating. And so that's why in terms of building Alexa skills, and I'm trying to make it framework agnostic, but this is what I know.
Right, no, that's fine.
So like there are utterances, which is what the user says, and there's slots, and those are kind of like what the variables are in those utterances. And so if you're saying I want a flight from JFK to Heathrow, JFK and Heathrow are the slots, and those slots are things that you can predefine and do machine learning on with Alexa to make sure that she understands all the different ways that you can say JFK, or all the different airports that could go into any of those slots. And stuff that we're working on here is a lot of analytics around that and saying, okay, which slots tend to fail the most? How can we give these kinds of metrics to developers to say, okay, they got to this point in the conversation and that's when it failed. Or they got to these parts of the conversation and these were really successful. The learning model totally understood what was saying. The confidence score was high. And there's a lot of work to do in that regard, because again, first of all, it's just tough machine learning and analytics work that has to be done. But second of all, that whole privacy bit, people don't like the idea of being recorded, and developers don't want to feel like they're spying on people, but at the same time they need to optimize these experiences. And so that's why they predefine what can be said, so it's not just listening to whatever users can say. And it's a delicate balance. It's a lot of challenges, but it's something that is definitely being worked on at Amazon very actively, and on Alexa very actively. And some of the things in that skill testing tool is great. I love playing with it. You can type out your interactions or speak to the tester and it has kind of an Alexa device built in, you can see what exactly is passed in code-wise and what is spat out, what the user interface looks like, if there's a screen involved. And you can also click through the different elements of your conversation and see like, okay, which functions were called and how are they called based on what I said here? What if I said it a different way? How would that change? And it's kind of a lot of trial and error because you can't just run a function and say, okay, it works, great. You have to actually be a part of that flow of conversation. So I imagine some people find it very tedious, but it's also really interesting to kind of understand that art of conversation and testing how a conversation can flow.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is there some sort of like proactive, not proactive, I don't know exactly how to say it, but is there a way for a user of a certain skill to then like submit feedback to that skill and say, hey, this was my experience and it was good or it was bad?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so that kind of depends on the skill. Some developers, they have it built in where you can say like, say feedback if you'd like to give us feedback, and then like they give instructions that way. Sometimes people can just use the Alexa app and report a skill from the Alexa app. One aspect of the app that I really like is it has intent history. And you can go through and like look at what you said to Alexa and just see what all was said to call skills and everything, whether it's saying what's the weather or calling a skill like, I don't know, Jeopardy and saying let's play Jeopardy. And that is really useful both for the users to see what Alexa understood in case it gave you something incorrect, or it's useful to the developers where if you're submitting some kind of bug report, whether it be to Amazon or to the skill itself, they can kind of guess what you said and kind of see the metrics based on that. Yeah, there's lots of tools out there, and luckily users are very vocal, and so it's been fun kind of interacting with both customers and developers, seeing what metrics they want and what metrics they are really enjoying and stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. So what do you think about the future of voice first computing?
I think it's something that like it's going to grow just because it's not just Amazon doing it. Like you said, Google is doing it. Microsoft has their Cortana thing. There's plenty of startups in the world and much smaller companies doing it. There's companies all over the place experimenting with this form of user interface. And that's because it's something that's so natural and something that we finally have the ability to work on. And the ability to work on and perform well. And it's something that we just didn't have in the past. And so I do think in the future it will be bigger and it will be growing. And that being said, I think it's just more about context awareness and natural conversation. And I think those are key. For natural conversation, that's just better machine learning and really just better voice design and making a conversation just flow naturally as if you're talking to another person in the room. And I think that a lot of the devices are getting there now. Like when I walk to my closet every morning, I say, Alexa, what's the weather today? I find out what the weather is today, and I get like a flash briefing if I want it, and it just happens, and it's something that I don't have to think about anymore. Like to the point where when I'm in hotels, all of a sudden I'll try to talk to Alexa and she's not there. So I think we're getting to that point once it's more popular. I know that there's millions of devices out there now, but once it's even more popular and in almost every household, it's just going to be a natural thing. And that being said, context awareness is the other big aspect of it. And with context awareness, it's saying something like, for example, if my mother-in-law is coming home, and I'm talking about it, Alexa can say, hey, I noticed your mother-in-law's coming home. Would you like me to book an Airbnb for you? Or something like that. And being able to have kind of those interactions where it's so natural that we don't have to define anything. Where if there's some kind of interaction with my calendar, with my contacts list, with anything in the house, I can be able to say, okay, Alexa, I have a meeting later today. Can you book the reservation? By the way, when I get home, I'm going to want the heater on, and I'll probably play some music so that way I can kind of come in happy, and just that sort of thing. And it being just kind of a natural, both assistant and also just natural aspect of your house that is aware of everything enough, with the permission you give it, of course, that you can just have it be a part of how your house is. And it's the future smart home. It's like those old movies about houses that kind of come alive. I think that's a big aspect of it. But being able to have those voice experiences everywhere, I think, will be key. Having the context of being in your house, being in your car, being on a walk, being wherever you're going, if you can just say, hey, remind me to do this, or something like that, so you don't have to think about it, that'll be huge. And I'm very curious to see like how kids today, young kids these days, how kids today, when they get older, what it'll be like for them. Because right now, like millennials, people who kind of grew up with phones and stuff, it's very natural for them to, like, by the age of 3, know how to like swipe and open their favorite app and stuff on a phone. And I can only imagine what it'll be like for voice first computing to be so natural in a home, in any context, that kids who grew up with it will just kind of expect it to work, and it will. And it's all really exciting to think about. It's something that will only get bigger for sure.
Yeah, that concept of people like assume, like now everybody assumes that pretty much all screens are touch screens, especially little kids. And somebody on Twitter, I'm forgetting who it was, said that they were in like Best Buy or something, and they were in the speaker section, and their like 4-year-old walked up to just like a normal speaker and said like, "What name do I call it?" Just assuming
Wow.
that he could start talking to it by one of the names. And he was like, "Oh, that's just like a speaker. It's not a smart speaker."
Dang. Well, that's where the world's going, I guess. That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And what you were saying about like it becoming natural, like we have a couple Echoes and we have a HomePod in our house. And so walking around, turning the lights on and off, saying good night, what's the weather, all of that stuff is just like, it's super normal for us now, to the point where my wife and I were staying in an Airbnb the other day, and like I did what you were talking about. I like the lights were on, and I was like walking towards the bed, and I was just like, I use computer as like the wake word, so I just said, "Computer, turn off the lights," and then nothing happened, and I was like, "Oh wait, I'm not at home." So I think it's cool that we've made it that far. Even just a few years ago, it was
unheard of.
It was right. It was. I mean, yeah, and it was thought of as something that would be. It would be a long time until they became that reliable, right? And now for that like specific set of tasks around, I mean, like cooking, setting timers, all that stuff, it's just like seamless. And I think it will be interesting to see how this transition from like the maybe like 10 to 20 base things that most people use them for all the time, how that will transition into much more like some of the things you were talking about it, about them being able to do like just fully understand your conversation and not have to be like a request and a response, but instead like talking to another person and having 5 different requests that are kind of like all mingled together, and they're all just done because the smart assistant is smart enough to understand, like you were saying, the context and the person speaking to it, and they have the like permissions of that person's voice versus another person's voice, and all of that is really, really intriguing. And I think there's we're definitely moving that direction, and but I'm excited to see how it continues to move.
Yeah, I'm definitely fascinated to see how it'll grow and change because I feel like that experience that you and I had is something that more and more people are going to be experiencing just because
Hmm.
it's growing and it's just kind of the natural way. And so yeah, I'm definitely curious to see where it'll end up.
Yeah, and I think we're probably early adopters to the point where like a lot of people I know who have Echoes or whatever, they don't necessarily have like the whole lighting set up
Hmm.
or the whole, all of those other things just because they're not really that hard to do, but they're just kind of like one step past what some people are comfortable
Yeah,
with.
it's a step
And
beyond.
yeah, and as they continue to become more and more common, and as people are more and more used to having these devices, and they've kind of taken that first step, and now they're used to having the device and using it for cooking and using it for music and weather and stuff like that. I think more and more people will say, "Oh, I wish I could do the lights thing that I saw in that commercial, or that my friend does." And then the smart home concept that's been around for decades is going to become more and more common for like a normal family in the suburbs or whatever instead of primarily early adopters.
Yeah, and already like at my sister, she also works on Alexa actually. And
That's interesting.
yeah, yeah, it's great. We actually we're very close. We lived together in school, worked together before, and now we're working together again. And her house is tricked out with all the Alexa stuff. She has every single bulb in her house is a smart bulb. She has all of her speakers set up. She has all of her door locks set up. Like everything is completely like smart and just wired for that. And it's so fun coming to her house because she'll be able to be like, okay, turn on the kitchen lights and turn on the this music so that way I can get cooking. And like the every single time new like smart house devices comes out, she is one of the first people to get on it. And it's really fun to see it because I know that she's a very early adopter and it's only going to get bigger from there.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and like the smart locks are really uh, they're really cool. I live in an apartment, so I feel like for some of the not smart locks, those pretty much all like go over the actual lock, so that wouldn't be a problem. But a lot of the like we have all of our lights that are like lamps. Those are all smart light bulbs, but like the ones that are built in, like in the bathroom or whatever, um, you would also have to get like a smart switch so that it doesn't just automatically, if somebody hits the switch, then it breaks the connection,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and
and
she has those set up too, and
yeah,
like all the cans in the house are set up and everything.
yeah, that's really cool. That's kind of like the step too far for me right now in our apartment. But I would like to. It would be nice, when it's like, hey, turn off all the lights and they all go out except for the kitchen light. It's like, dang it,
Right.
I need to like go.
Yeah, and
But eventually,
yeah, at my house we have a routine, my husband and I, where we just had it set up where we say Alexa good night, and she'll turn on bedroom lights, turn off all the downstairs lights, and kind of just turn off various things that we have set up. And it's nice. It's definitely getting to the point where I'm just like, ugh, I'm a little too far in, and robots are going to take over. But at the same time, it's so nice and convenient. I don't know when it'll ever stop, if it ever will, but it's really fun to experiment with this stuff.
yeah, I think so, and I'm excited to see where it's going, and I'm excited to see, there's just a lot of investment, like you were saying before, from a lot of different companies, and it seems to me like a good amount, uh, a good type of competition. Like the people are beginning to realize that this is important, and so competition is growing, and as it's growing, everybody is pushed to make better and better things for the consumer, and that's a good place to be as a consumer, but also as somebody. I mean, I would assume also as somebody who's working on it. That's exciting to like be being pushing forward and working really hard to make it the best this can possibly be.
Yeah, totally.
So, final question I always ask on the show. is what is one thing that you find unusual in tech right now?
Ooh, unusual. I mean, tech is an unusual place, so where do I
Right.
begin? um, okay, the first thing that came to mind, and it's just really weird to me, are those robots that are really like realistic. And they're kind
Hmm.
of in an uncanny valley state right now where they'll like be able to make really good facial expressions, and people who like make this fake silicone skin over the robots' faces so that way they can make a fake face and stuff. Those ones kind of freak me out. That's probably the most unusual and weird thing for me right now is being able to create those robotic faces and everything. And I don't know how I feel about it, but currently I'm not sure if I'm a fan. But then in more like usual things, I think it's kind of along the same lines. Or I shouldn't say usual, in more like continuing the unusual things, but more common and not just robots, is seeing the face manipulation online and people being able to map facial expressions to audio and being able to sync it up. Like there was a video that someone made of Obama, and based on a bunch of facial recognition stuff and manipulation, they were able to make it look like he was reading something that he never actually did. So some
Yeah.
speech and stuff. That I think is really unusual, and I it's amazing technology, but I don't know if I want it to be advanced right now because it kind of breaches the whole like fake news element.
It reminds me of how like Photoshop kind of taught us not to believe pictures we see on the internet.
Yeah.
And as I've seen quite a bit about it, this technology, and they've got different examples from Obama to like different political people to random like movie stars where they can just basically make them say whatever they want. And as that continues to become more common and more like uh, and more I guess easily usable by normal people, I think we're going to have to take a similar approach to not being able to believe every piece of video that we see. Whereas before, if there was like video evidence, you could be like, okay, like
There it is.
that's probably right. Like the type of skill and like effort it would take for somebody to do like a CGI version of this is means that it probably didn't happen, right?
Right.
Like this has probably actually happened, right? Whereas now it's moving down the chain to where it takes less skill and less effort and less money to make this actually happen. And so we're going to have to, as a society, we're going to have to transition uh, what we automatically believe, and that is scary in the current context of fake news and context of filter bubbles and context of like a lot of um, a lot of what's going on in the world today of like what can you believe that you see on the internet and what can't you believe, who can you trust, and this is just one more layer in that. And I think there's similar stuff for like voices as well. If there's a significant, like if you have enough of a person's if a person speaks publicly enough, so you have a big enough like sample set of their voice and how they sound in
Yeah.
different situations, then you can do a very similar thing where you can that it'll sound actually like that person said it. And I think that's what they did with Obama in that example, and some of the other ones we were mentioning, is it was both the video and the voice, which is double
Right.
doubles the
Double the
effectiveness
trouble.
and the right. Exactly. um I think that is definitely really interesting, and along the lines of the robots, I saw something I don't know, the other day, and maybe this is fake news too, but I saw this somewhere about a robot that was given citizenship to some country. It was, and it like looked like a human. I thought that was interesting, and it's kind of like a Black Mirror type of
Yeah.
concept of like as these things become more and more human-like, and as I mean, there's been tons of sci-fi about this, right? Like as they become more and more human-like, do they have or do we continue to treat them only as devices that they are, or at some point is there like a line where it's no longer a device, but because of the amount of intelligence in that thing, it has some sort of right? And I don't think we're really anywhere close to that right now, but I think the sci-fi tends to do a good job of trying to get you to think about things way before we're actually there.
Right. It spooks you, for sure.
Right. Yeah, like Westworld right now has that concept, right? A lot of like making very undistinguishable robots that eventually get consciousness.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're ever going to actually be able to do the consciousness part, but I think the undistinguishable from humans is inevitable at some point.
Yeah. I haven't seen Westworld yet, but I've heard about that concept, and yeah, there's so much sci-fi out there where I'm just like, well, at least it's science fiction, but it's still like sometimes it toes the line with reality a little too much, and I'm like, oh no, it's coming. I have to prepare.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think I like reading sci-fi because it does kind of make you think about some of those things ahead of time and begin to see like what would I do in that situation. But then it is so far in the future that I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. And like in our lifetimes, there's a lot is going to change in the next 80 years. And if we can see, I mean, like I'm 27, so like in the last 27 years, the world has changed a lot, and things that were considered like sci-fi, like voice first, right? That whole concept was in like all of the sci-fi movies and books as a concept, but it wasn't really a thing. And like the type of touchscreens and cell phones and voice calling and video calling and all of that stuff was so early days that it was considered sci-fi, and now it's just like part of our lives. That's really intriguing to me.
Yeah, totally. And we're about the same age, and yeah, like even looking back on Disney's, like the old Disney movie Smart House, there's some things in there where you're just like, man, we're close to that. This was such a fantastical thing that was never going to happen, and now we're actually close to it. Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. It can be scary. It can be fun. I'm looking forward to it. It's inevitable.
Yeah, I think it is important though that like some of these things that around privacy, around like how I mean, if the people making the robots, like how we're going to interact with them, how we're going to know it's actually a robot, the people making this like stuff that allows you to replicate anybody's like voice and video, we shouldn't just be like creating technology because we can. I mean, I'm all for creating technology because we can, but also like we need to have people thinking about the impacts of those things, and as much as possible, like be beginning to like set the stage for the fact that these things are going to change our world, and that people need to like understand that it's going to change our world, and begin thinking through some of the like hard problems or misuses of the tools that we're making that are great in, 90% of the use cases are really, really amazing and are great for the world, but there's a subset that it can be used for not so good things. And how do we deal with that? How do we prevent that if we can, or how do we like mitigate the amount of times it's used that way? And I think we're beginning to see more and more of that in just like general culture, as people begin to see how a lot of what's happening in technology is impacting the rest of the world in significant ways. And I think that's actually a good like transition to us being more thoughtful about how what we build is actually impacting the world. And I don't know. That's something I think that we all probably need to think more about.
Yeah, for sure. It's and that's also where, like, for example, the not so great diversity in tech is dangerous, because as all of these things are trained by the same people from the same kind of demographic, if you don't have people from a diverse set of backgrounds, diverse places, diversity of thought, diversity of gender and skin color and everything, if you don't have all of those people working on these sorts of technologies, then they could be skewed potentially for the worse, or just not be as smart as they could be, not be as high quality as they could be. And it's something that, like, we kind of, all this being said, we kind of all have to be in this together to be able to make these technologies the best that they can be. Otherwise, they'll just kind of end up being a bad experience for almost everyone.
Yeah, I agree. So where can people find you on the internet, Cassidy?
Sure. So if you look me up, Cassidy Williams, there's if you look it up on Google, there's myself and a Scooby-Doo character, and I am not the Scooby-Doo character. So that's the first place you can find me. Otherwise, my username is Cassidoo, Cassidoo, on most things: Twitter, GitHub, CodePen, LinkedIn, all that jazz. And yeah, you can find me Cassidoo, or if you just look up my name, you'll find me eventually.
Okay, awesome. And you guys can find me on Twitter at TimothyBuckSF, and you can find Unco on Twitter at _UncoFM. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Cassidy. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great.